The crystal glass shattered against the wall beside my head, red wine splashing across my white blouse like blood. Time seemed to slow as droplets rained down my face, each one burning with humiliation. The restaurant fell silent. Forks stopped, mid-air. Conversations died in throats. And there was Jason, my husband of 7 years, looking at me with that smirk I'd grown to dread. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Can't you take a joke, Becca?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. God, you're so sensitive. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply dabbed my silk napkin against my ruined blouse, counted to 3, and stood up from the table. "Excuse me," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Then I walked out of Portland's most exclusive restaurant, the echo of Jason's laughter following me into the rain-soaked night. That was the moment everything changed. Not because it was the first time Jason had humiliated me, but because it would be the last. My name is Rebecca Thompson. Everyone calls me Becca. 6 months ago, I was known primarily as Jason Thompson's wife, the woman who organized the dinner parties, who laughed at all the right moments, who wore the perfect outfits to his corporate events. The supportive spouse who had put her own business dreams on hold to help her ambitious husband climb the ladder at Meridian Tech, Portland's fastest-growing software company. That night at Riverside, Portland's most exclusive restaurant overlooking the Willamette River, wasn't supposed to be different from any other. Jason's team was celebrating closing their biggest account yet. The client was there, a Fortune 500 company that would put Meridian on the map. So were Jason's boss Andrew and several board members. I'd spent hours getting ready, choosing a cream silk blouse and tailored pants that Jason had approved with. A distracted nod. The evening had progressed like a tightly choreographed dance. I'd asked the right questions, laughed at the right jokes, made sure Jason's glass was never empty. I was perfect, until I wasn't. It happened during dessert. The conversation had turned to the marketing strategy for the new client, and I mentioned an observation about their brand positioning. "They're trying to appeal to younger demographics," I said, "but their visual language still feels corporate and outdated." The client, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, leaned forward. "That's exactly what I've been saying. What's your background, Becca?" Before I could answer, Jason laughed. It was that specific laugh, the one that sounded warm to strangers but felt like ice sliding down my spine. "Oh, Becca used to think she knew marketing," he said, swirling his wine, "before she decided being my wife was a full-time job." A few people chuckled uncomfortably. I felt heat rise to my cheeks but pressed on. "I actually ran business development. For—" "Honey," Jason interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension, "nobody wants to hear about your little projects from college." The table fell silent. I saw Andrew shift uncomfortably in his seat. The client's smile tightened. "Actually," she said, "I'd be interested to hear—" That's when it happened. Jason, perhaps realizing he'd miscalculated, perhaps annoyed that I wasn't following the script, picked up his wine glass. I thought he was going to take a drink. Instead, he flicked his wrist. The wine hit my face and chest with shocking force. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he threw the empty glass against the wall behind me. It shattered, sending crystal shards, raining onto my shoulders. Time seemed to stop. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the wine soaking through my blouse, the eyes of everyone in the restaurant burning into my skin. "Can't you take a joke, Becca?" Jason said, looking around for approval. "God, you're so sensitive." In the silence that followed, I heard the soft gasp of the client, saw Andrew's face drain of color, noticed the waiter frozen mid-step a few feet away, a dessert tray balanced in his hand. I should have screamed, should have thrown my own glass back at him. should have made a scene that matched the violence of his action. Instead, I did what I'd been conditioned to do for 7 years. I minimized the damage. I dabbed at my blouse with my napkin, stood up with as much dignity as I could, and simply said, "Excuse me." Then I walked out, leaving Jason to do what he did best, charm his way out of a situation he had created. The Portland rain felt appropriate as I stepped outside. Cold drops mixed with the wine on my face, diluting the sticky sweetness. I didn't cry. Not yet. A strange calm had settled over me, like the eye of a hurricane. I knew the storm would come. The anger, the hurt, the humiliation. But in that moment, walking through the rain to my car, I felt nothing but clarity. I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers marking time as I made a decision. This wasn't about a ruined blouse or public embarrassment. It was about 7 years of small cruelties building to this moment. Jason interrupting me in conversations, dismissing my ideas, making jokes at my expense that left bruises no one could see. Our townhouse was dark when I arrived. I moved through it like a ghost, touching surfaces as if saying goodbye. The kitchen where I'd hosted his colleagues for dinner. The living room where I'd sat quietly while he dominated conversations. The office where I'd helped him prepare presentations for work, my own business plans gathering dust in a drawer. I opened that drawer now, pulling out a leather portfolio I hadn't touched in months. Inside were business cards, a half-completed, website design, market research, and a business plan for Thompson Consulting. My dream that I'd set aside when Jason convinced me his career needed to come first. "You can always start your business later," he'd said. "Right now, I need you to help me make this work. We're a team, remember?" A team. I almost laughed. Teams don't have one member shine while the other fades into the background. Teams don't humiliate each other in public. I heard the front door open around midnight. Jason's footsteps were uneven. He'd clearly had more to drink after I left. I didn't turn when he entered the office, keeping my eyes on the business plan in front of me. "There you are," he said, his voice artificially bright. "What a night." "Huh?" I said nothing, turning a page in my portfolio. "Oh, come on, Becca. It was a joke. Everyone was laughing." I looked up then. Were they? Something in my tone made him pause. He loosened his tie, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Look, I'll admit I had too much to drink. But you embarrassed me in front of the client. You know how important this account is." "How did I embarrass you?" My voice was soft, but steady. "You were trying to talk business when you don't even work there. It made me look bad." "No, Jason. You throwing wine in my face made you look bad." He sighed dramatically, running a hand through his hair, a gesture he used when he thought he was being patient with me. "Fine, I'm sorry about the wine. Happy now? Can we move on?" I closed my portfolio and stood up. "I've already moved on." His eyes narrowed, noticing the suitcase by the door for the first time. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm leaving." Jason laughed, but it was hollow. "Don't be dramatic, Becca. Where would you even go?" "I've rented an apartment in the Pearl District. I've been paying for it for 2 months. The smugness drained from his face. "You what?" "You heard me. With what money?" His voice had an edge now. We shared accounts, or so he thought. "My money, Jason, the money I've been setting aside from the freelance work I've been doing." "Freelance work? What are you talking about?" I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The genuine confusion in his eyes showed just how little attention he'd paid to my life, how little he'd cared about my ambitions, my growth, my existence outside of being his wife. "I've been consulting on the side. Small businesses, mostly, building their marketing strategies, improving their business development approaches. I'm actually quite good at it." His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. "So, you've been lying to me? Working behind my back?" "No, Jason. I've been telling you for years. You just haven't been listening." I picked up my suitcase, the weight of it reassuring in my hand. 7 years of marriage, and all I needed to take with me fit into one bag. That fact alone told me everything I needed to know about how empty our relationship had become. "This is ridiculous," Jason said, blocking my path to the door. "You're overreacting. It was one stupid incident." "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "It was years of incidents. Tonight was just the final one." "So that's it? You're throwing away our marriage over a glass of wine?" I shook my head. "You threw our marriage away, Jason. One drop at a time." I moved past him toward the door. He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firmly enough to stop me. "Becca, wait. Let's talk about this in the morning, when we've both calmed down." For a moment, I wavered. 7 years is a long time to invest in a person. A long time to build a life, even one as hollowed out as ours had become. But then I remembered the look on his face as the wine hit me. Not shock, not regret, but satisfaction. As if he'd finally put me in my place. "I am calm," I said, gently, removing his hand from my arm. "That's what scares you." I left him standing in our perfectly decorated living room. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Surrounded by the life he thought we'd built together. The life that, for me, had become nothing but a beautiful prison. The rain had stopped by the time I stepped outside, leaving the streets of Portland gleaming under streetlights. I took a deep breath, tasting the petrichor. That distinctive scent of earth after rain. It smelled like possibility. My new apartment was small, just a studio in an old warehouse converted to lofts. But it was mine. I'd signed the lease 2 months ago, after Jason had made me the butt of his jokes at his company's summer party. I'd known then that I was working toward this moment, even if I hadn't been ready to admit it to myself. That night, I slept better than I had in years, lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of my new neighborhood and the even more unfamiliar feeling of peace. I woke to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages from Jason. They formed a predictable pattern: confusion, anger, guilt-tripping, bargaining, and finally, threats. "You're making a huge mistake. I can't believe you'd do this to me before the Miller presentation. Everyone thinks you're being ridiculous. If you're not home by tonight, don't bother coming back at all." The last one made me smile. He still thought this was temporary, that I would come crawling back once I'd made my point. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I showered, dressed in clothes I'd chosen for myself rather than to please Jason's aesthetic, and sat down at my laptop. I had work to do. First, I opened my banking app and transferred half of our savings to my new personal account. Legally, I was entitled to it. Morally, I'd earned it, not just by supporting Jason's career, but by contributing my own income that he'd apparently never noticed. Next, I called Olivia, my best friend who'd been keeping her distance because Jason had always found a way to make her feel unwelcome in our home. "Becca?" Her voice was cautious, as if she couldn't quite believe I was calling. "Are you okay? I heard about what happened at Riverside." Of course she had. Portland's tech scene was small and news traveled fast. "I'm better than okay," I told her. I left him. Her intake of breath was audible. "You did? For real this time?" "For real." "Oh my God," she whispered. "Where are you? Do you need anything?" "I need a friend," I said, surprising myself with the emotion in my voice. "And maybe some coffee." We met at a small cafe in my new neighborhood. When Olivia saw me, she hugged me so fiercely I almost broke down. It had been so long since someone had touched me with genuine affection rather than possessive familiarity. "You look different," she said as we sat down with our lattes. "Lighter." I feel lighter and terrified and sad and relieved all at once. That sounds about right. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What happened?" "I mean, I heard about the wine, but—" "It wasn't just the wine," I explained. "It was everything leading up to it. The way he'd dismiss me in conversations. The jokes that weren't really jokes. The way he'd make me feel small when I talked about starting my own business." Olivia nodded. "I saw it happening, but every time I tried to say something, you'd defend him." "I know." I stared into my coffee. I kept thinking if I was just patient enough, supportive enough, he'd go back to being the man I thought I married. But that man never existed. Or if he did, he disappeared so gradually I didn't notice until he was completely gone. "So what now?" Olivia asked. I pulled out my portfolio and slid it across the table. Thompson Consulting becomes a reality. Her eyes widened as she flipped through my business plan. "Becca, this is incredible. You've been working on this the whole time?" Whenever Jason was working late, or on business trips, or too busy to notice what I was doing. Which was always. I nodded. "Exactly." "So, what's your first move?" I took a sip of my latte, savoring the moment before I answered. "I have a meeting with Maya Chen next week." Olivia nearly choked on her coffee. "Maya Chen? The VC? Who just moved to Portland from Silicon Valley? How did you manage that?" "Remember that charity gala Jason refused to attend last month because it wasn't important enough? Maya was there. We got talking about the challenges female founders face in securing funding. One thing led to another, and I mentioned my business plan. She asked to see it." "And Jason had no idea?" "Jason stopped asking about my days a long time ago." Olivia shook her head in amazement. "So you're really doing this?" "I'm really doing this," I confirmed. "And there's something else." I pulled out my phone and opened an email I'd received that morning. It was from Andrew Harrington, Jason's boss at Meridian Tech. "Is that—" Olivia peered at the screen. "Andrew wants to meet with me. Apparently the client from last night, the one Jason was so desperate to impress, was horrified by what happened. She told Andrew she doesn't want to work with Meridian if that's how they allow their employees to behave." "Wow." Olivia sat back. "So he might lose the account because of this?" "Looks that way. Do you feel bad about that?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally. "I feel bad that other people might be affected by it, but Jason did this to himself. And to be honest, it's time there were consequences." Olivia raised her coffee cup in a toast. "2 consequences." I clinked my cup against hers. "And new beginnings." As we finished our coffee, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation, not dread, not anxiety, but genuine excitement for what the future might hold. My phone buzzed with another text from Jason. "This isn't over, Becca. You'll regret this." I showed it to Olivia, who raised an eyebrow. Charming as ever. I put the phone away without responding. Jason was right about one thing. This wasn't over, but it wasn't going to end the way he expected. Not anymore. Because for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't following his script. I was writing my own. The Pearl District morning light filtered through my studio's industrial windows, casting geometric patterns across the hardwood floor. I sat cross-legged in the center of this light show, surrounded by documents, spreadsheets, and half-empty coffee cups. The foundation of my new life taking shape in the form of business projections, marketing strategies, and client proposals. 3 days had passed since I walked out of the restaurant with wine staining my blouse and resolve hardening in my chest. 3 days of silence on my end, despite Jason's increasingly desperate attempts to contact me. His messages had evolved from angry demands to wounded confusion to tentative apologies. "Becca, this is crazy. Come home so we can talk like adults." "You're being ridiculous. It was just wine." "Fine. I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear?" "Please call me. We can work this out." I read each message with a strange detachment, as if they were being sent to someone else, the woman I used to be, perhaps. The woman who would have accepted that hollow apology, who would have returned to that beautiful townhouse and its suffocating silence, who would have continued to shrink herself to fit into the narrow space Jason had allocated for her. My phone buzzed again. Not Jason this time, but Andrew Harrington, Jason's boss at Meridian. We had agreed to meet for coffee this afternoon, though he hadn't specified what he wanted to discuss. I suspected it had something to do with damage control. The Miller account, the Fortune 500 client who had witnessed Jason's display, was too valuable to lose. As I showered and dressed, selecting a deep blue blouse and tailored black pants, I considered my approach. I had no desire to help Jason salvage his reputation, but I didn't want to be vindictive either. I would be honest with Andrew, nothing more, nothing less. Compass Coffee was busy when I arrived, the afternoon crowd of tech workers and creative professionals filling the industrial space with a productive hum. Andrew was already there, occupying a quiet corner table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. He stood when he saw me, his expression a careful mix of professional concern and genuine warmth. "Becca, thank you for coming." He pulled out a chair, for me. "I took the liberty of ordering your usual." I smiled, appreciating the gesture. Andrew had always been kind to me, treating me as a person in my own right, rather than just an extension of Jason. "Thank you." We sat, the awkwardness of the situation hanging between us for a moment before Andrew cleared his throat. "I want to start by saying how sorry I am about what happened at Riverside," he said, his voice low and sincere. "It was completely unacceptable." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, anchoring myself. "I appreciate that, Andrew." "I've known Jason for 5 years," he continued, a furrow appearing between his brows. "I've seen him be pushy, even arrogant at times, but I've never seen him be cruel like that. Especially not to you." "You haven't been looking closely enough," I said quietly. Andrew's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something darker. "Has this happened before?" "Not the wine," I clarified. "But the dismissal? The public humiliation disguised as jokes? Yes, many times." He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. "I'm afraid I need to ask you some difficult questions, Becca. Not as Jason's boss, but as someone who's responsible for the culture at Meridian." Of course. Mrs. Miller, the client, she was deeply disturbed by what she saw. She's questioned whether Meridian is the kind of company she wants to partner with. I nodded, unsurprised. Catherine Miller had a reputation for being progressive and principled, famous for walking away from deals that didn't align with her values. She specifically mentioned concerns about how Jason treats women in professional settings, Andrew continued. She wondered if what she witnessed was an isolated incident or part of a pattern. The question hung in the air between us. I could feel the weight of it, the potential consequences of my answer. If I told Andrew about Jason's pattern of behavior, particularly toward female colleagues, it could devastate his career. If I minimized it, I would be complicit in allowing it to continue. "It's not isolated," I said finally, the truth sliding out like a sword from its sheath. Jason has always been dismissive of women he perceives as threatening his status, particularly in professional settings. Andrew's expression remained carefully neutral, but I could see him processing this information. "Can you elaborate?" I took a sip of coffee, organizing my thoughts. Have you noticed that none of the women who started at Meridian around the same time as Jason are still there? I hadn't connected those dots, he admitted. Melissa Chen left after Jason took credit for her market analysis. Emma Walsh transferred departments after Jason repeatedly interrupted and undermined her in meetings. Sarah Jenkins quit altogether after Jason dismissed her concerns about a product feature that later proved to be a significant security issue. Andrew looked stunned. Why didn't anyone report this? Would you have believed them over Jason? The charming, confident sales director who brings in the biggest accounts? He flinched slightly, the truth of my words clearly hitting home. We would have investigated any formal complaint and created a reputation for the women as troublemakers. In the process, I added, it's easier to leave than to fight that battle, especially when the odds are stacked against you. Silence settled between us as Andrew absorbed this. I could almost see the memories reshuffling in his mind, incidents and patterns coming into sharper focus. I appreciate your honesty, he said finally. It can't be easy to discuss this. Actually, it is, I replied, surprising myself with the realization. It's keeping silent that was difficult. Andrew nodded slowly. Mrs. Miller has requested that Jason not be involved with her account moving forward. Naturally, we want to accommodate that, but it creates a significant challenge. Jason has been the lead on this project from the beginning. I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. This was not my problem to solve. The thing is, Andrew leaned forward slightly, Mrs. Miller specifically asked if you might be available for consulting. I nearly choked on my coffee. Me? She was impressed by your insights about her brand positioning, before. He trailed off, not needing to specify before what. I'm not a Meridian employee, I pointed out. No, but you have a background in business development and marketing, don't you? Jason mentioned once that you used to work in the field before you took a break. The diplomatic phrasing almost made me smile. A break. As if my career had been temporarily paused rather than systematically undermined. I did, I confirmed, and I've actually been doing some consulting work recently. Andrew's eyebrows rose slightly. Have you? That's perfect timing, actually. We're in a bit of a bind with the Miller account, and bringing you on as an external consultant could be an elegant solution. I sat back, stunned by the turn. This conversation had taken. I had expected questions about Jason, perhaps some awkward expressions of sympathy, not a job offer. You want to hire me to manage the account that Jason was responsible for? As a consultant, yes. You'd work directly with Mrs. Miller's team on the rebranding strategy, with support from our design and development departments. The irony was almost too perfect. The account Jason had spent months pursuing, the one he'd been so desperate to impress that night at Riverside, being handed to me, the wife he'd thrown wine at for daring to speak up. Andrew, I said carefully, I appreciate the offer, but I need to be clear about something. Jason and I are no longer together. I've left him. He nodded, unsurprised. I assumed as much. This isn't about Jason, Becca. This is about salvaging an important client relationship and bringing in someone with the skills to do it. The fact that it solves our ethical concerns about Jason's involvement is a bonus. I took a moment to consider the offer. The practical part of my mind recognized what an opportunity this was. A major client for my fledgling consulting business, a significant addition to my portfolio. The emotional part of me wondered if I was ready to step into a role that would inevitably bring me into Jason's orbit again, even peripherally. I'd need to establish clear boundaries, I said finally. I would report directly to you, not to Jason or anyone on his team. All communications about the project would go through you or a designated project manager who isn't Jason. Absolutely, Andrew agreed quickly. In fact, I think it's best if Jason isn't involved at all. We'll assign a different internal liaison. And my rate is $150 an hour, I added, the figure coming to me instinctively, higher than I'd planned to charge my early clients, but appropriate for a company of Meridian's size and the complexity of the project. Andrew didn't even blink. That's within our budget. When can you start? I'd need to review all the existing project documentation first, and I'd want to have a preliminary meeting with Mrs. Miller before committing fully. Of course. I can have the files sent over today, and we can schedule a meeting with Catherine, Mrs. Miller, for early next week. I nodded, a plan taking shape in my mind. Send everything to my new email address. I wrote it on a napkin and slid it. Across the table, Becca Thompson Consulting. Com. Andrew read it and smiled. Thompson Consulting? I've been planning it for a while, I admitted. Recent events just accelerated the timeline. Well, Meridian would be honored to be among your first clients. He extended his hand across the table. Do we have a deal? I took his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. We do. As we shook on it, I couldn't help but think about how differently this week had turned out than I'd expected. On Sunday, I'd been Jason's wife, sitting silent and wine-soaked in a restaurant. By Thursday, I was a business owner negotiating a contract with his boss. There's one more thing, Andrew said as we finished our coffee. Jason doesn't know about this conversation. I assumed as much. He'll need to be informed that he's being removed from the Miller account and that we're bringing in an external consultant. Andrew hesitated. Given the personal complications, I thought you should know that this conversation will happen tomorrow morning. I appreciated the warning. Thank you for telling me. It's going to be difficult for him, professionally and personally. I don't say that to make you feel responsible. What happened wasn't your fault, and your leaving is absolutely your right. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I thought you should be prepared for his reaction. I nodded, understanding the implication. Jason wouldn't take this well. His pride, his reputation, and his relationship were all crumbling simultaneously, and Jason had never handled loss with grace. I'll be careful, I promised. As I walked back to my apartment, the Portland afternoon wrapping me in soft gray light, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Triumph, certainly. I had just secured my first major client. Anxiety about the challenges ahead, and a lingering sadness for the man I had once loved, the man who had just lost far more than he realized. I wasn't naive enough to think Jason would accept this turn of events quietly. He would rage, he would blame me, he would try to sabotage me. But for the first time in our relationship, I was prepared for his tactics. I had spent years studying the way Jason operated, watching him charm and manipulate, observing his strategies for undermining opposition, and now that knowledge would become my shield. When I reached my apartment, I found a bouquet of white roses outside my door. No card, but I didn't need one to know who they were from. White roses had been my wedding flower. Jason was attempting to remind me of happier times, to trigger nostalgia and doubt. Just last week, this gesture might have worked. I might have seen it as a sign that he still cared, that he remembered the details that mattered to me. Now, I recognized it for what it was. Another manipulation, as calculated as everything else Jason did. I left the flowers in the hallway and went inside, locking the door behind me. My phone rang almost immediately. Jason. I hesitated, then answered. I would need to talk to him eventually. It might as well be on my terms. Becca. His voice was soft, relieved. You answered. What do you want, Jason? Did you get the flowers? I saw them. White roses, like at our wedding. He paused, waiting for a sentimental response. When I offered none, he continued. We need to talk, Becca. Face to face. This has gone on long enough. It's been 4 days. 4 days too many. This isn't us, Becca. We don't do this to each other. I almost laughed at the revision of history. No, Jason, you did this to us, to me. I apologized for the wine. This isn't about the wine, I interrupted. The wine was just the final act. This is about years of you dismissing me, belittling me, making me feel small so you could feel big. He was silent for a moment, processing this perspective that clearly hadn't occurred to him. That's not fair, he said finally. I've supported you, given you a good life. You've given me the life you wanted, not the one I wanted. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done having this conversation, Jason. You'll be hearing from my lawyer next week. I started to hang up, but his next words froze me. I had an interesting call from HR today. My heart skipped a beat. Had Andrew moved faster than expected? They wanted to know if I was aware that my wife was interviewing for a consulting position with the company. So that was it. Someone in HR had recognized my name on the paperwork Andrew had started processing. Portland's tech scene was too small for secrets. Ex-wife, I corrected. And it's not an interview. It's a done deal. His laugh was sharp, disbelieving. You're working for Meridian now? In what capacity exactly? I'm consulting on the Miller account. Silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, connecting dots, realizing implications. My account, he said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. Not anymore. You can't do this, Becca. I'm not doing anything. Catherine Miller requested. Me specifically. Another silence, longer this time. You planned this, he accused. You've been planning all of this. No, Jason. You created this situation all by yourself. I'm just no longer cleaning up your messes. This is my career we're talking about. And for 7 years, it was the only thing that mattered. Now you can see how it feels to have something you care about dismissed and devalued. Is that what this is? Revenge? I considered the question seriously. Was it revenge I was after? The satisfaction of seeing Jason face consequences after years of avoiding them? No, I said finally. It's not revenge. It's justice. And it's me finally putting myself first. You won't get away with this, he said, his voice hardening. You think you can just waltz into my workplace and take over my projects? You're not qualified, Becca. You've been a housewife for 7 years. The old barb might have stung once. Now it just confirmed I was making the right choice. We'll see, I said simply. Goodbye, Jason. I ended the call before he could respond, and blocked his number. Then I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and got to work. If Jason wanted to question my qualifications, I would make sure my first professional act was flawless. The project files arrived from Andrew an hour later. I immersed myself in them, learning everything I could about Catherine Miller's company, their market position, their challenges and goals. I worked through the night, building a preliminary strategy that would address her concerns while showcasing my unique perspective. By morning, I had a solid foundation for my first client presentation. I also had 3 emails from Jason sent to my new business address, each one increasingly angry, the last one threatening legal action if I didn't back off. I forwarded them to Andrew without comment and continued working. My meeting with Maya Chen, the venture capitalist, was scheduled for that afternoon. I had intended to ask for a modest investment to launch Thompson Consulting properly, but now, with Meridian as my first client, I had leverage I hadn't expected. Maya's office was in a renovated warehouse even closer to the river than mine, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a direct gaze that seemed to evaluate everything about me in an instant. Becca, she said, gesturing me to a seat in her minimalist office. I've been looking forward to this. Thank you for making time, I replied, setting my portfolio on the glass desk between us, especially on such short notice. Your email intrigued me. You mentioned new developments? I nodded, launching into the story of the past week, the incident at Riverside, my departure from Jason, and most importantly, the contract with Meridian. I presented the facts without emotion, as if discussing a case study rather than my own life. Maya listened intently, her expression giving away nothing until I finished. So, she said finally, you've secured a Fortune 500 client for a business that doesn't technically exist yet, after walking away from your marriage less than a week ago. Put that way, it sounded either impressive or delusional. I wasn't sure which. Yes, I confirmed, which is why I need to accelerate my timeline. I've developed the business plan over the past year, but I hadn't expected to launch for at least another 6 months. Maya opened the portfolio I'd provided, scanning the executive summary of my business plan. Your original ask was for $50,000. In seed funding. Is that still what you're looking for? I took a deep breath. No, I'd like to revise that to $150,000. Maya's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a significant increase. The scope of the business has changed. With Meridian, as a reference client, I can target larger companies immediately. That means I need to scale faster, hire support staff, secure proper office space, develop more sophisticated systems. She studied me for a long moment, then looked back at the business plan. You've been planning this for a year? Planning the business, yes. Planning to leave Jason. That was a more recent decision. But not impulsive, she noted. No, not impulsive at all. Maya leaned back in her chair. Tell me something, Becca. What happens if Jason tries to undermine you at Meridian? He has relationships there that you don't. It was a valid concern, one I had spent considerable time thinking about. He'll certainly try, I acknowledged. But Andrew Harrington is aware of the situation and supports my involvement. More importantly, Catherine Miller specifically requested me. Jason's influence only extends so far. And personally, will you be able to focus on building this business while going through a divorce? Especially one that's likely to be contentious? The business is my focus, I said firmly. It's what I've wanted for years, what I've been working toward even when Jason was dismissing it as a hobby. If anything, the divorce gives me clarity and motivation I didn't have before. Maya nodded slowly, then closed the portfolio. I'll need to review the full business plan in detail, but based on what I've seen and heard today, I'm tentatively interested in providing the funding you're requesting. Relief washed over me. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she cautioned. I have conditions. First, I want 15% equity rather than the 10% you proposed. I had anticipated this. 12%, I countered, and a seat on the advisory board, not the board of directors. A small smile curved Maya's lips. Agreed. Second, I want regular updates. Weekly for the first 3 months, then bi-weekly after that. That's reasonable. Third, she continued, I want right of first refusal on any additional funding rounds for the next 2 years. This gave me pause. If Thompson Consulting took off as I hoped, future funding rounds could be at much higher valuations. Giving Maya priority could potentially limit my options. For the next year, I amended, and capped at an additional $300,000. She considered this, then nodded. Done. My team will draw up the paperwork. We should be able to close within 2 weeks. Sooner if your documentation is in order. It is, I assured her. Every spreadsheet, projection, and legal document had been meticulously prepared over months of late nights while Jason worked or socialized. As we stood to shake hands, Maya held mine a moment longer than necessary. One piece of advice, Becca. The tech world is small, especially in Portland. Whatever happens with your ex-husband, take the high road publicly. Your reputation will be your most valuable asset. I understand, I said, knowing she was right. As satisfying as it might be to expose Jason's behavior to the world, doing so would only reflect poorly on me in the long run. Good luck with Meridian, Maya said as she walked me to the door. I look forward to hearing how it goes. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in days. The future that had seemed so uncertain when I walked out of that restaurant was taking shape, becoming solid and real with each step I took. Back at my apartment, I found another bouquet outside my door. Not roses this time, but lilies, my favorite flower, though I couldn't remember ever telling Jason that. There was a card with these ones. I was wrong. Let me make it right. Dinner. Tomorrow? Jay. I brought the flowers inside this time, arranging them in a vase on my small dining table. Not because the gesture moved me, but because I wanted to remember this moment. The point where Jason realized he might actually lose me and began making a genuine effort. Too little, too late, but significant nonetheless. My phone rang as I was finishing the arrangement, an unfamiliar number with a Portland area code. Becca Thompson, I answered, using my professional voice without thinking. Ms. Thompson, this is Catherine Miller. I straightened immediately. Mrs. Miller, what a pleasant surprise. Please, call me Catherine. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all. I was just reviewing the materials for your project. That's actually why I'm calling, she said. Andrew Harrington tells me you've agreed to consult on our rebranding. I wanted to touch base directly. I appreciate that, I said, moving to my desk and opening my laptop. I've been developing some preliminary thoughts based on the files Andrew sent over. Before we get into that, Catherine said, her tone shifting slightly, I want to address the elephant in the room. The circumstances that led to our connection were unusual, to say the least. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, remembering the wine, the shattered glass, the humiliation. Yes, they were. I want you to know that I requested you not out of pity or some misplaced sense of justice, but because you showed insight that night. Before. She hesitated. Before the incident. You made an observation about our brand positioning that was more perceptive than anything your husband had said in months of meetings. The validation soothed something in me I hadn't realized was still raw. Thank you for saying that. I believe in recognizing talent, Ms. Thompson. And in second chances. Not for men who throw wine at women, she added quickly, but for women who have been underestimated. I smiled, genuinely touched by her directness. In that case, I look forward to exceeding your expectations. Excellent. Now, tell me what you're thinking about our millennial engagement problem. For the next hour, Catherine and I discussed her company's challenges and opportunities. She was sharp, decisive, and open to new ideas in a way that made the conversation both challenging and exhilarating. By the time we hung up, we had agreed to move our formal meeting up to the next day, and I had a much clearer picture of what she was looking for. As I prepared for bed that night, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. You've made a serious mistake. Board meeting Monday. We'll see who they believe. Jay. I stared at the message, my heart rate accelerating. Jason was escalating, moving from personal appeals to threats, and he had apparently found a way to get himself in front of Meridian's board. A power play designed to undermine my position before I'd even properly begun. For a moment, fear gripped me. Jason was persuasive, connected, and desperate. If he convinced the board that I was vindictive or unqualified, my contract could be canceled before it truly started. But then I remembered something, a detail from one of the project files Andrew had sent over. I searched through my emails until I found it. A recorded presentation Jason had given to the internal team about the Miller account. I played it back, listening carefully until I heard what I was looking for. We're targeting the male executive demographic primarily, Jason's voice said confidently. The female market is secondary at best. I checked the date stamp on the recording, 2 months ago. Then I reviewed my notes from my conversation with Catherine. Our primary target is professional women aged 30-45, she had said explicitly. Men are important, but they're not driving our growth. Jason had been pitching the wrong strategy from the beginning. He'd been so confident in his own assumptions that he hadn't actually listened to the client. And now he was planning to take that same misguided confidence to the board. I smiled grimly. Jason had just handed me exactly what I needed. I composed a brief, professional email to Andrew, attaching the relevant clip from Jason's presentation, and a summary of my conversation with Catherine. No accusations, no emotion, just facts that spoke for themselves. I thought this discrepancy might be relevant to Monday's board discussion, I wrote. Catherine and I have a meeting tomorrow to align on targeting strategy. I'll update you afterward. I sent the email, then turned off my phone. Whatever Jason was planning, I had done what I could to prepare. The rest would unfold as it would. That night, I dreamed of glass, shattered wine glasses, glass office buildings, delicate glass sculptures. In the dream, I walked carefully through a gallery of glass art, each piece more beautiful and fragile than the last. Jason followed behind me, his footsteps heavy and careless, threatening to topple everything with his wake. Be careful, I warned him in the dream. Everything will break. Let it, Dream Jason replied with a shrug. We'll just blame it on you. I woke before dawn, the dream lingering like a premonition. Today I would meet with Catherine. Tomorrow would bring Jason's board meeting and whatever chaos he had planned. The foundation of my new life was still setting, still fragile as glass. But unlike the dream, I wasn't afraid of what might break. Because I had finally realized something important. Some things needed to break before they could be remade into something stronger, something truer to their nature. My marriage had been one of those things. And now, as the first light of morning painted my small apartment in shades of possibility, I prepared to build something new from the fragments of what had shattered that night at Riverside, something that was entirely mine. The Meridian Tech headquarters loomed against the Portland skyline, a gleaming testament to modern architecture with its curved glass facade reflecting the mottled gray clouds above. I paused on the sidewalk, straightening my tailored navy blazer and adjusting the leather portfolio tucked under my arm. Even after years of attending events here as Jason's wife, entering as Rebecca Thompson, consultant, felt entirely different. The security guard at the front desk did a double-take when I approached. Mrs. Thompson? I thought you might be with Mr. Thompson. It's Ms. Thompson, I corrected gently. And I'm here for a meeting with Catherine Miller and Andrew Harrington. His eyebrows rose slightly. Of course, let me just... He tapped at his computer, confirming my appointment. 12th floor conference room. Do you need an escort? I know the way, I assured him, accepting the visitor badge he handed me. The elevator ride gave me a moment to center myself. I had prepared meticulously for this meeting, reviewing every document related to the Miller account, constructing a presentation that addressed Catherine's concerns while offering innovative solutions. I knew my strategy was sound. The only X factor was Jason. What he might do when he learned I was in the building. The 12th floor was Meridian's executive level, a space Jason had always spoken of with reverence. The conference room where Catherine waited overlooked the Willamette River, its wall of windows bringing the Pacific Northwest's natural beauty inside. Catherine Miller stood when I entered, extending her hand with a warm smile. She was a striking woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. Becca, right on time, she said, her grip firm and confident. I appreciate punctuality almost as much as I appreciate insight. Thank you for meeting on such short notice, I replied, setting up my laptop at the conference table. Andrew will join us shortly, Catherine explained, returning to her seat. He's dealing with some internal matters. The board meeting, I thought. Jason's attempt to undermine me before I'd even begun. "That's fine," I said, connecting my computer to the room's presentation system. "It gives us a chance to speak candidly first." Catherine's smile widened slightly. "I appreciate candor as well. Tell me, how are you holding up? Personally, I mean." The question caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of the past week, few people had asked about my emotional state with genuine concern. I paused, considering how to respond. "I'm stronger than I expected to be." "Not surprising," Catherine said. "A woman doesn't develop the kind of insights you shared at dinner without having considerable strength beneath the surface." Before I could respond, the conference room door opened and Andrew entered. His typically impeccable appearance was slightly rumpled, his tie askew, and a tension around his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. "I apologize for the delay," he said, taking a seat across from Catherine. "The board meeting ran long." Catherine waved away his apology. "Becca and I were just getting acquainted. Perhaps you could share the outcome of your meeting if it's relevant to our discussion?" Andrew glanced at me, hesitation evident in his expression. "Actually, it is relevant. Jason raised some concerns about our decision to bring Becca on as a consultant." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of concerns?" "He suggested there might be a conflict of interest given your personal situation." Andrew chose his words carefully. "He also questioned whether you had sufficient experience to handle an account of this magnitude." "And the board's response?" Catherine asked, her tone deceptively light. Andrew straightened his tie, a small smile forming. "They rejected his concerns. The email you sent me last night was particularly illuminating, Becca. The discrepancy between Jason's targeting strategy and Catherine's actual priorities made it clear that a fresh perspective is exactly what this account needs." Relief coursed through me, though I was careful not to show it too obviously. "I'm glad that settled then." "Not entirely," Andrew admitted. "Jason was displeased with the outcome. He's requested a meeting with you, Becca. The board suggested it might be beneficial to clear the air before proceeding." "I see." I kept my voice steady, though my heart rate accelerated. "When?" "After our meeting with Catherine. He's waiting in my office." Catherine leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "Is this necessary, Andrew? I'm not comfortable with my account being affected by personal drama." "I assure you it won't be," I said quickly. "My professional commitments are entirely separate from my personal situation." Catherine studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Let's focus on the task at hand, shall we? Show me what you've prepared." For the next hour, I walked Catherine through my initial assessment of her company's market position and my proposed strategy for reaching their target demographic. I highlighted the disconnect between their corporate visual identity and the younger female audience they hoped to attract, offering concrete solutions for bridging that gap. Catherine interrupted occasionally with incisive questions that pushed me to think deeper, to defend my recommendations with data and insight rather than assumptions. It was the most intellectually stimulating professional exchange I'd had in years. When I finished, she sat back, a satisfied expression on her face. "This is precisely what we've been missing, Andrew. A clear-eyed view of who we actually are versus who we want to be." Andrew nodded, looking relieved. "I'm glad to hear it. Shall we discuss next steps?" "I'd like Becca to develop this into a comprehensive 3-month strategy," Catherine said decisively, "with weekly check-ins and the flexibility to pivot as we see results." She turned to me. "Can you deliver that within 2 weeks?" "Absolutely," I confirmed. "I'll have a detailed timeline to you by Monday." "Excellent." Catherine gathered her things, preparing to leave. "I have another engagement, but I'm very pleased with our direction. Andrew, Becca, I look forward to our partnership." As Catherine departed, Andrew exhaled audibly. That went better than I hoped. She knows what she wants, I observed. That makes the job clearer, if not easier. Indeed. Andrew checked his watch. About Jason. I'll meet with him, I said, surprised by my own calmness. It's better to address this directly than let it fester. Andrew led me through the executive floor to his corner office. Through the glass walls, I could see Jason pacing inside, his posture rigid with tension. He turned as we approached, his expression darkening when he saw me. I'll give you two some privacy, Andrew said, opening the door for me. My assistant is right outside if you need anything. I appreciated the subtle reminder that I wasn't alone in the building. Thank you, Andrew. Stepping into the office, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. How many times had I met Jason in offices like this one, playing the role of supportive wife as he celebrated another professional triumph? The dynamic was entirely different now. Well, Jason said as Andrew closed the door behind me, you've been busy. I set my portfolio on Andrew's desk, keeping it between us. I have a life to rebuild. By destroying mine? His voice was tight with controlled anger. Was that your plan all along? To humiliate me professionally the way you claim I humiliated? You? No one's destroying your career, Jason. You lost one account. An account worth millions, he snapped. And it's not just the account. It's how this looks. My wife leaves me and immediately takes over my biggest client? People are talking. Becca, I'm sure they are, I agreed. Just like they talked when you threw wine in my face at dinner. Actions have consequences. Jason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew well. That was one mistake, one moment of poor judgment. Does it really justify all this? This isn't about revenge, I said quietly. Catherine specifically requested me because she saw value in my perspective. That has nothing to do with our marriage or its end. Bullshit. Jason stepped closer, lowering his voice. You could have turned it down. You could have recommended someone else. Instead, you seized the opportunity to undermine me. The way you undermined me for years? I maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. The way you dismissed my ideas, belittled my ambitions, made me doubt my own worth? Something flickered in Jason's eyes. Confusion, perhaps, or the first glimmer of recognition. That's not how it was. It's exactly how it was. You just never noticed because it didn't hurt you. I took a deep breath, centering myself. Look, I didn't come here to rehash our marriage. I'm here because I've been hired to do a job and I intend to do it well. How you respond to that is your choice. Jason's laugh was bitter. My choice? What choice did you leave me? You walked out without warning, froze our accounts, and now you're working with my company. Tell me, Becca, what choice do I have in any of this? The same choice I had every time you diminished me in public, I replied evenly. You can either rise above it and prove your worth through your work, or you can let it define you. He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In many ways, I was. The woman who had quietly absorbed his criticisms, who had shrunk herself to avoid conflict, who had believed his assessments of her capabilities, she was gone. Who are you? He asked, finally, genuine bewilderment in his voice. I'm the woman I was always meant to be, I answered simply. The one you never bothered to see. A knock at the door interrupted whatever response Jason might have had. Andrew's assistant poked her head in. Ms. Thompson, your next appointment is in 15 minutes. You wanted a reminder. I nodded gratefully. Thank you, Claire. I'll be right out. As she closed the door, Jason's expression hardened again. Another meeting? You've certainly made yourself at home here quickly. I'm meeting with Maya Chen, I said, gathering my portfolio. She's investing in Thompson Consulting. Jason's eyes widened slightly. Thompson Consulting? You're actually going through with that? Did you think it was just a hobby? I asked, echoing the dismissive term he'd so often used for my business plans. Or perhaps a cute way to keep myself occupied while you did the real work? He had the grace to look slightly abashed. I didn't think you were serious about it. That much is obvious. I moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Jason, I didn't plan any of this. I didn't leave you to take your client or damage your career. I left because I finally realized I deserved better than how you treated me. And now? He asked, an unfamiliar vulnerability in his voice. Is this how it's going to be between us? Professional rivals? I considered the question seriously. That depends entirely on you. I'm not interested in conflict, Jason. But I won't diminish myself to protect your ego, not anymore. The board won't let this stand, he said, a last attempt at asserting control. Once the initial novelty wears off, they'll see that bringing my ex-wife into the company creates an untenable situation. Perhaps, I conceded, but by then, I'll have had the chance to prove my value. Will you be able to say the same? I left him standing in Andrew's office, staring after me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. As I walked toward the elevator to meet Maya, I felt lighter somehow, as if confronting Jason had released a weight I'd been carrying for years. Maya was waiting in the lobby of her venture firm's office, sleek and confident in charcoal gray. You look different, she observed as I approached. More. Definitive. I smiled at her choice of words. I feel more definitive. Good. She led me through to a conference room where two people were already seated. A young man with a tablet, and a woman about my age with a sharp bob and sharper eyes. Becca, meet Raj, my financial analyst, and Elena, my legal counsel. They'll be helping us finalize the investment details. The next hour was a whirlwind of terms, conditions, and projections. Maya's team was thorough, challenging my assumptions and pushing me to clarify my vision for Thompson Consulting. I found myself rising to each question, my confidence growing, with every exchange. Your projections are ambitious, Raj noted, scrolling through the spreadsheets I'd provided. Especially in the first year. They're based on concrete opportunities, I explained. With Meridian as my anchor client and the connections I've developed through my network, I have a strong foundation to build from. About your network, Elena interjected. Your ex-husband, is well connected in Portland's tech scene. Have you considered how your separation might affect your business relationships? It was a fair question, one I'd spent considerable time thinking about. I've analyzed my connections and categorized them into 3 groups, I replied, pulling up a document on my tablet. Those who are primarily Jason's contacts, those who are primarily mine, and those we share equally. My strategy focuses on strengthening relationships in the latter 2 categories while establishing new connections independent of Jason's influence. Maya nodded approvingly. Smart approach, and the Meridian contract gives you immediate credibility. Assuming it holds, Elena Bowens pointed out. From what you've shared, your ex-husband isn't taking this well. There's a risk he could undermine your position there. It's a calculated risk, I acknowledged, but one mitigated by my direct relationship with Catherine Miller and the quality of work I'll deliver. Jason can make things difficult, but he can't change the results I produce. Maya studied me thoughtfully. You've thought this through more thoroughly than most founders I meet. I appreciate that level of strategic planning. She turned to her team. I believe we have what we need. Let's prepare the final investment. Documents. As Raj and Elena gathered their materials, Maya held me back. One more thing, Becca. I've been invited to speak at the Women in Tech Summit next month. They're looking for another panelist to discuss female entrepreneurship in male-dominated industries. Given your unique perspective, would you be interested? The opportunity was unexpected but perfect, a chance to establish myself publicly in Portland's tech community. I'd be honored, I said sincerely. Excellent. It's high profile. Over 300 attendees, including most of the decision-makers in the local industry. Maya's smile held a hint of mischief. I believe Meridian is one of the sponsors. Jason will be there, I realized aloud. Most likely, Maya confirmed. Does that change your answer? I considered it briefly, then shook my head. No. If anything, it makes it more important that I participate. That's what I hoped you'd say. Maya handed me a business card with a name handwritten on the back. Reach out to Talia. She's organizing the panel and will get you all the details. As I left Maya's office, my phone buzzed with a notification. An email from Andrew Harrington, subject line. Update on Miller account transition. I ducked into a nearby cafe before opening it, ordering a latte to steady my nerves. The message was brief but significant. Becca, following our meeting with Catherine, the board has formalized your consulting arrangement for the Miller account. Jason has been officially reassigned to our Seattle expansion project, effective immediately. This should minimize any potential conflicts. I've attached the final contract for your review. Please sign and return at your earliest convenience. Andrew. I read the email twice, processing the implications. Jason hadn't just lost the Miller account. He'd been relocated to a different project entirely, possibly to save face. It was a diplomatic solution that protected everyone's interests, but it would undoubtedly feel like a demotion to Jason. My phone rang before I could respond to Andrew's email. Olivia's name flashed on the screen. Please tell me you're free. For dinner, she said when I answered. I need to hear everything about your week, and I refuse to do it over the phone. I laughed, suddenly aware of how much I needed a friend right now. Dinner sounds perfect. Where and when? 75 minutes at Laurel's. I already made a reservation. Olivia's decisive tone brooked no argument. And wear something fantastic. We're celebrating. What exactly are we celebrating? Your independence, your business, your life. I could hear the smile in her voice. Everything. Laurel's was a new restaurant in the Pearl District, known for its innovative cuisine and intimate atmosphere. When I arrived, wearing a silk dress I'd purchased that afternoon in a color Jason had always claimed didn't suit me, a rich, deep teal, Olivia was already waiting, a bottle of champagne chilling beside her. Look at you, she said appreciatively. As I approached, you're absolutely glowing. It's been an eventful day, I admitted, sliding into the booth across from her. Tell me everything, Olivia demanded, pouring champagne into delicate flutes. And don't skip a single delicious detail. I recounted my meeting with Catherine, the confrontation with Jason, and the investment discussion with Maya. As I spoke, I realized how much had changed in just 1 week. The woman who had walked out of Riverside with wine staining her blouse was almost unrecognizable compared to the woman I was becoming. So let me get this straight, Olivia said when I finished. You've secured a major client, obtained funding for your business, and effectively displaced Jason from his pet project, all in 5 days? When you put it that way, it sounds calculated, I winced. It sounds brilliant, Olivia corrected. And entirely deserved. Do you have any idea how long I've been waiting for you to stand up for yourself? Years, Becca. Literal years. I sipped my champagne, considering her words. I should have done it sooner. Maybe, but you weren't ready. Olivia's expression softened. And honestly, neither was I. If you'd asked me a month ago if you could pull all this off, I might have had doubts. Not about your capability, she added quickly, but about your willingness to put yourself first after so many years of putting Jason first. What changed your mind? The way you walked into this restaurant, Olivia gestured toward me. The way you're sitting right now, owning your space instead of trying to make yourself smaller. The way you told that story without once questioning whether you deserve everything good that's happening. I hadn't noticed these changes in myself, but Olivia was right. Something fundamental had shifted in my posture, my voice, my sense of self. To your metamorphosis, Olivia raised her glass. May it continue to amaze us both. We clinked glasses, and as the champagne bubbles danced on my tongue, I felt a surge of gratitude for this friend who had waited patiently for me to find my strength. There's something else, I said, setting down my glass. Maya invited me to speak at the Women in Tech Summit next month. Olivia's eyes widened. That's huge, Becca. Everyone who matters in Portland Tech attends that event. Including Jason, most likely. So, let him see you shine. Olivia leaned forward intently. This is your chance to establish yourself publicly, to introduce Thompson Consulting to the entire community at once. That's what I thought too, I admitted. But it's intimidating. I haven't spoken publicly in years. Then we'll practice, Olivia said decisively. Every day until the summit if necessary. You have too much wisdom to share to let fear hold you back. As we continued our dinner, discussing potential talking points and strategies for the summit, my phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications. I ignored it until Olivia raised an eyebrow. Popular tonight? I checked the screen and frowned. 3 missed calls from Andrew Harrington, followed by a text. Need to speak with you urgently. Please call when you can. Something's wrong, I murmured, excusing myself to return his call from the restaurant's entrance. Andrew answered immediately. Becca, thank you for calling back. What's happened? He hesitated, then spoke carefully. Jason came to my office after you left. He was upset about the reassignment. Things got heated, and he made some accusations about your qualifications. My stomach tightened. What kind of accusations? He claimed you had taken credit for his work in your presentation to Catherine, that the ideas you presented were actually strategies he had developed, but hadn't yet implemented. That's completely false, I said, anger rising. I developed that presentation based entirely on my own analysis of the materials you provided. I believe you, Andrew assured me. But Jason was quite convincing. He showed earlier drafts of documents that do contain some similar concepts. Similar, perhaps, but not the same. And certainly not developed to the level I presented. I struggled to keep my voice level. This is exactly what he did to Melissa Chen before she left Meridian. He takes other people's seeds of ideas, dismisses them initially, then later claims them as his own. Andrew was silent for a moment. That's a serious allegation, Becca. It's the truth. Ask Melissa if you don't believe me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. What does this mean for my contract? Catherine still wants you on the account, Andrew said quickly. But the board has asked for a more detailed presentation of your strategy, with clear documentation of how you developed it. When? Monday morning. Just 3 days to prepare a comprehensive defense of my work and my integrity. I'll be ready. I'm sorry about this, Becca, Andrew said, genuine regret in his voice. Jason has been with Meridian for 5 years. The board respects him, despite recent events. I understand, I said, though the unfairness stung. Thank you for the warning. I returned to the table, my earlier buoyancy deflated. Olivia took one look at my face and poured more champagne. That bad? I summarized Andrew's call, anger and hurt making my voice tight. Jason is trying to claim I stole his ideas, that everything I presented to Catherine was actually his work. That's ridiculous, Olivia scoffed. Anyone who's spoken to both of you about marketing for more than 5 minutes would know your approaches are completely different. The board doesn't know that, I pointed out. They know Jason as a successful, established director. They know me as his soon-to-be ex-wife who suddenly appeared with a consulting contract. So what are you going to do? I straightened my shoulders, determination replacing defeat. I'm going to prove that my work is my own. And in the process, I'm going to show them exactly who Jason really is. Olivia's smile turned predatory. Now we're talking. How can I help? We spent the remainder of dinner strategizing. Olivia, who worked in marketing analytics, offered to help me document my creative process, establishing clear evidence of how I had developed my strategy independently. We should reach out to Melissa too, Olivia suggested, and any other women who experienced similar treatment from Jason. Not to create a public scandal, she added quickly, but to establish a pattern if the board needs convincing. By the time we finished our dessert, I had a clear plan for my defense. It would require working through the weekend, but I was energized rather than exhausted by the challenge. As we left the restaurant, I spotted a familiar figure across the street, watching us from beside a parked car. Jason. Our eyes met briefly before he turned away, disappearing around a corner. Was that? Olivia asked, following my gaze. Yes. A chill ran through me despite the mild evening. He was watching us. Creepy, Olivia muttered, hailing a rideshare for us. You're not going back to your apartment alone. I'll be fine, I assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at me. Jason's manipulative, not dangerous. Manipulation can be dangerous, Olivia countered. At least let me stay with you tonight. We can get started on your defense strategy. I accepted gratefully, uncomfortable with the idea of being alone after seeing Jason lurking outside the restaurant. In the year we'd been building toward, the growing boldness of his attempts to regain control was unsettling. As our ride pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the spot where Jason had stood. He was gone, but his presence lingered like a shadow. For the first time since leaving him, I felt a flicker of genuine fear, not of physical harm, but of how far he might go to discredit me, to force me back into the box he had created. But alongside that fear was something stronger: resolve. Jason had spent years making me doubt myself, question my worth, minimize my ambitions. I wouldn't let him do it again, not when I had finally found my voice. Back at my apartment, Olivia and I spread my work across the dining table, meticulously tracking the evolution of each idea in my presentation. We worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and determination, until we had created an irrefutable timeline of my creative process. As the first light of dawn filtered through my windows, I looked at our work with satisfaction. Every concept, every strategy, every insight was clearly documented, with timestamps and progressive iterations showing how my thinking had evolved. This is bulletproof, Olivia said, stifling a yawn. The board would have to be completely biased not to see the truth. Thank you, I said, squeezing her hand gratefully. I couldn't have done this without you. Sure you could have, she replied with a tired smile. But it wouldn't have been nearly as much fun. We laughed, the tension of the night dissolving in the gentle morning light. Whatever Jason had planned for Monday's meeting, I was ready. More than ready. I was eager to stand before the board and show them exactly what Thompson Consulting could do. As Olivia dozed on my couch, I opened my laptop one last time to check my email. A new message waited, sent just minutes earlier. From Catherine Miller. Becca, Andrew informed me of the situation with Jason in Monday's meeting. While I have complete confidence in your work, I wanted to offer my support. I'll be attending the board meeting personally to ensure there's a voice of reason present. Some men seem to forget that stealing another's idea requires recognizing its value in the first place, something Jason clearly failed to do with yours until it was too late. Rest assured, this is merely a formality. Our work together will continue regardless. Catherine. I read the message twice, warmth spreading through me. Catherine Miller, a woman I had met just days ago, was willing to stand beside me against Jason's accusations. It was a powerful reminder that for every person like Jason who sought to diminish women's contributions, there were others like Catherine who recognized and championed them. I closed my laptop, a sense of calm settling over me. Monday's meeting was not a threat but an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate not just my professional capability but my personal integrity. And perhaps, in doing so, to finally break free of Jason's influence completely. As I drifted toward sleep, one thought remained crystal clear. The woman who would walk into that boardroom on Monday morning was not the same woman who had walked out of Riverside with wine staining her blouse and shame burning her cheeks. She was stronger, clearer, more determined. She was, at last, herself. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that seemed almost cinematic. Rain-washed skies giving way to unexpected sunshine, the Portland skyline crisp against a backdrop of blue. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing a structured charcoal suit that conveyed authority without aggression, paired with a silk blouse in a deep emerald that made my eyes look greener, more intense. The woman in the mirror looked poised, professional, and utterly unfamiliar to me. She looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, defending her ideas with confidence. "You've got this," Olivia said, appearing behind me in the reflection. She'd stayed the entire weekend, helping me prepare for today's presentation, refusing to leave me alone when Jason might reappear. "That documentation timeline we created is unassailable." "It's not just about the documentation," I replied, fastening simple pearl earrings, a gift from my grandmother, not Jason. "It's about showing them who I really am, who I've always been, beneath the persona of Jason's wife." "Then show them," Olivia said simply. "Don't hold back." The Meridian Tech boardroom was intimating by design. Gleaming walnut table, leather, chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a commanding view of the city. When I arrived, precisely 15 minutes early, Andrew was already there, arranging papers with nervous precision. "Becca," he greeted me, relief evident in his voice. "I was beginning to worry you might change your mind." "That's not my style," I replied, setting up my laptop and connecting it to the presentation system. "Has the full board confirmed attendance?" Andrew nodded. "All 6 directors plus Catherine Miller. And Jason, of course." "Of course." I kept my voice neutral, though my pulse quickened at the confirmation. This wouldn't just be a defense of my work. It would be a direct confrontation with the man who had systematically undermined me for years. What about Melissa Chen? Was HR able to reach her? "Yes, she's agreed to join by video conference for a portion of the meeting." Andrew lowered his voice. She was surprisingly eager to participate once she understood the context. I nodded, unsurprised. Melissa had left Meridian abruptly 2 years ago after a project she'd led was suddenly reassigned to Jason, who later received a promotion based largely on its success. The official story was that she'd found a better opportunity elsewhere, but the tight smile she'd worn at her farewell party had told a different tale. Board members began filing in shortly after, serious men and women in expensive suits, most of whom I recognized from company events I'd attended as Jason's wife. They regarded me with expressions ranging from polite curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. I met each gaze directly, refusing to shrink under their scrutiny. Catherine Miller arrived next, striding into the room with purposeful energy. She caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod of encouragement before taking a seat near the head of the table. Her presence alone was a powerful endorsement, and I felt my confidence solidify. Jason was the last to enter, his timing clearly calculated, to make an entrance. He'd chosen a suit I recognized, the same one he'd worn when pitching to Miller initially, his power suit, as he called it. Our eyes met briefly, his narrowing with something between determination and warning before he took a seat directly, across from me. "Let's begin," said Harold Winters, Meridian's CEO and board chairman. We're here to address concerns raised by Jason Thompson regarding the Miller account and our recent consulting arrangement with Rebecca Thompson. Jason, as you brought this matter to our attention, please start. Jason straightened in his chair, his expression shifting to the earnest, concerned look I'd seen him practice in mirrors before important meetings. Thank you, Harold. I want to start by saying this is difficult for me personally, but my commitment to Meridian's success necessitates me speaking up. He launched into a carefully crafted narrative, portraying himself as the dedicated director whose work had been appropriated by his estranged wife during a bitter separation. He spoke of strategy documents he'd drafted months ago, of concepts he'd been developing that mysteriously appeared in my presentation to Catherine. The similarities are too striking to be coincidental, he concluded, sliding folders toward each board member. I've provided copies of my original documents with date stamps showing when these concepts were first developed. While I understand Becca's desire to establish herself professionally during this difficult time in our marriage, it shouldn't come at the expense of honest business practices. The room fell silent as the board reviewed his materials. I remained still, waiting for my turn, not allowing even a flicker of reaction to cross my face despite the audacity of his claims. Rebecca, Harold turned to me. How do you respond to these allegations? I took a measured breath, then spoke with quiet conviction. I appreciate the opportunity to address this directly. The work I presented to Catherine was developed independently, based on my analysis of the materials Andrew provided after I accepted the consulting opportunity. I've prepared a comprehensive overview demonstrating the evolution of my strategic approach. I launched my presentation, walking the board through the documented timeline of my work, screenshots with timestamps, progressive iterations of concepts, even recordings of brainstorming sessions Olivia and I had conducted. With methodical precision, I highlighted the fundamental differences between Jason's approach and mine. While there are surface similarities in some areas, which is natural when addressing the same business challenges, our methodologies and underlying assumptions are fundamentally different, I explained. Jason's strategy emphasizes male executives as the primary demographic, while mine correctly identifies professional women aged 30-45 as the core growth market. A distinction Catherine confirmed was critical. I glanced at Catherine, who nodded firmly. That's correct. Rebecca's understanding of our target demographic was precisely what made her approach valuable to us. Furthermore, I continued, I've invited someone who can speak to the pattern of behavior relevant to this situation. I nodded to Andrew, who activated the video conference screen where Melissa Chen waited patiently. Melissa's testimony was brief but devastating. In measured professional language, she described how Jason had consistently dismissed her ideas in meetings, only to present very similar concepts as his own weeks later. She detailed the project that had ultimately led to her departure, a marketing initiative she had developed over months, only to have Jason claim it as his innovation after a convenient reorganization placed him in charge. I left Meridian because I couldn't continue working in an environment where my contributions were systematically appropriated, she concluded. I'm speaking today not out of vindictiveness, but because I believe a company's culture is defined by how it addresses these patterns when they're exposed. I thanked Melissa, and as her image disappeared from the screen, turned back to the board. I understand how this situation appears from the outside. A personal relationship ending messily, spilling over into the professional realm. But this isn't about my marriage ending. It's about recognizing that women's ideas and contributions have value, even, perhaps especially, when men in positions of power attempt to claim them as their own. Jason's face had progressively darkened during my presentation, and now he leaned forward, voice tight with barely controlled anger. This is absurd. You're turning a simple intellectual property dispute into some kind of gender crusade to distract from the fact that you had access to my work for years. You've sat beside me while I developed strategies, listened to me talk through concepts. Is it really surprising that those ideas would appear in your work? I met his gaze steadily. Yes, Jason, I did listen to you talk about your work for years. I also watched you dismiss my suggestions, only to present them as your own insights weeks later. I watched you do the same to Melissa, to Emma Walsh, to Sarah Jenkins. The pattern isn't mine. It's yours. That's enough, Harold interrupted, raising a hand. This is becoming personal, and I'd like to refocus on the specific matter at hand. Catherine Miller cleared her throat. If I may, Harold, the personal is directly relevant here. I witnessed firsthand how Jason treated Rebecca at Riverside, publicly humiliating her for offering a business insight that, as it happens, was completely correct. That incident wasn't an aberration. It was a window into a pattern of behavior that directly impacts Meridian's ability to serve clients like me effectively. The boardroom fell silent. Catherine's position as a major client gave her words significant weight, and no one, not even Harold, seemed eager to dismiss her perspective. I've reviewed both sets of materials thoroughly, she continued, and there's no question in my mind whose approach better serves our needs. If Meridian wants to retain our business, Rebecca will continue as our consultant. That's non-negotiable. Harold exchanged glances with the other board members, a silent communication passing between them. I think we need to deliberate privately on this matter, he said finally. Rebecca, Jason, if you could step outside for a few minutes. We exited to the waiting area outside the boardroom, maintaining a careful distance from each other. Jason paced restlessly while I sat perfectly still, focusing on keeping my breathing even and my expression neutral. Inside, I was a storm of emotions. Anger at Jason's blatant attempt to discredit me, anxiety about the board's decision, pride in having finally spoken my truth publicly. This won't work, Jason said suddenly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Even if they side with you today, you can't possibly succeed long-term. You don't have the connections, the experience, the reputation. You mean I don't have your connections? I replied calmly. Your experience, your reputation, and you're right, I don't. I have my own, which is precisely why Catherine values my perspective. She's one client, he scoffed, and when this novelty wears off, when she realizes you're out of your depth, she'll move on. They always do. I studied him thoughtfully, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time how much of his confidence was actually insecurity in disguise. Is that what you're really afraid of, Jason? That I might succeed where you're struggling? That without me, supporting you, managing your life, smoothing your path, you might discover you're not as exceptional as you've convinced yourself you are? Color flooded his face. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? I leaned forward slightly. Who organized your client dinners, remembered their children's names, their hobbies, their preferences? Who proofread your presentations, caught your errors, suggested improvements you passed off as your own? Who managed our social calendar to ensure you were seen with the right people at the right times? It wasn't your natural charm that built your network, Jason. It was my labor. Before he could respond, the boardroom door opened and Andrew appeared. They're ready for you both. We returned to our seats, the tension between us palpable. Harold's expression gave nothing away as he folded his hands on the table before him. After reviewing the evidence and considering Catherine's position as a valued client, the board has reached a decision, he announced. We find no compelling evidence that Rebecca Thompson improperly used Meridian's intellectual property or Jason's work in her consulting approach. Her contract will remain in place, and she will continue to lead the Miller account. Relief washed through me, though I maintained my professional composure. Beside me, Jason sat rigid, his knuckles white where he gripped the arm of his chair. Additionally, Harold continued, these proceedings have raised concerns about our internal practices regarding credit for intellectual contributions. We'll be conducting a broader review of project management protocols, particularly as they relate to collaborative work. It was diplomatic language for a serious investigation, and judging by the tight set of Jason's jaw, he understood the implication perfectly. Jason, you'll continue to focus on the Seattle expansion as previously assigned. I expect both of you to maintain absolute professionalism despite your personal circumstances. The board will not tolerate this situation affecting Meridian's operations or reputation further. Is that clear? We both nodded, though Jason's agreement seemed forced through clenched teeth. As the meeting concluded and people began to disperse, Catherine approached me. "Excellently handled," she said, pitching her voice for my ears alone. "You didn't just defend your work, you demonstrated exactly why your perspective is valuable. That poise under pressure, that's what I'm investing in." "Thank you for your support," I replied sincerely. "It means more than I can express." "Women supporting women isn't just a hashtag," she said with a wry smile. "It's a strategic imperative. Now, shall we schedule our next working session? I'm eager to move forward with implementation." As Catherine and I confirmed our next meeting, I was acutely aware of Jason watching us from across the room, his expression unreadable. When we finished, Catherine departed with a warm handshake, leaving me to gather my materials alone. Jason approached as I disconnected my laptop, his voice low and controlled. "Congratulations, you've won this round." "This isn't a competition, Jason. Isn't it?" He laughed without humor. "You've taken my client, damaged my standing with the board, and turned Catherine Miller against me. If that's not strategic warfare, I don't know what is." I closed my laptop case deliberately before meeting his gaze. "You know what the difference is between us? When you lose a client, you see it as someone taking something from you. When I gain a client, I see it as an opportunity to provide value. That fundamental difference in perspective is why Catherine chose me, not because I manipulated her against you." His expression hardened. "This professional rebrand is impressive, Becca. The confident consultant rising from the ashes of her marriage. But we both know who you really are. The woman who couldn't make a decision without seeking my approval for 7 years. Do you really think that person just disappears overnight?" "She didn't disappear overnight," I corrected him gently. "She's been finding her voice for longer than you noticed. The wine just gave her permission to use it." I stepped around him, heading for the door, but paused when he called after me. "The Women in Tech Summit next month," he said. "Maya Chen invited you to speak, didn't she?" I turned, surprised he knew about that. "Yes. Meridian is a major sponsor. I'll be there representing the company." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking forward to hearing your insights on female entrepreneurship, given your extensive 3-week experience." The subtle threat was clear. He intended to undermine me publicly at the summit, to question my credibility before the entire Portland tech community. A week ago, this would have terrified me into withdrawing. Now, I merely nodded. "I look forward to seeing you there," I replied calmly. "I'm sure it will be enlightening for everyone." I left him standing in the boardroom, walked through Meridian's gleaming corridors, and emerged into the bright spring morning feeling lighter than I had in years. The board meeting had been more than a professional victory. It had been a personal reckoning. The moment I finally stood before the man who had diminished me for so long and refused to be made small again. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. Maya Chen. "Heard about the board meeting. Impressive. Let's accelerate our timeline. Funding wired today. Welcome to entrepreneurship." I smiled, sending a quick thank you before driving to the small office space I'd secured in an up-and-coming area of the Pearl District. It was modest compared to Meridian's grandeur, just 2 rooms with industrial windows and exposed brick. But it was mine, Thompson Consulting's first official headquarters. The space was still largely empty, awaiting furniture that would be delivered later that week, but I wanted to stand in it today, to feel the reality of what I was building. I walked the perimeter slowly, envisioning how it would look when finished, how it would feel to welcome clients through that door. My phone rang again. Olivia, eager for an update. I recounted the meeting in detail as I continued exploring my new space, describing Melissa's testimony, Catherine's unwavering support, and Jason's barely contained fury. "So you completely annihilated him," Olivia concluded with satisfaction. "In front of his bosses, his colleagues, and his most important client. Epic." "It wasn't about annihilating him," I clarified, though I couldn't deny the justice felt satisfying. "It was about establishing the truth, about refusing to let him define my narrative any longer. And the fact that it completely demolished his credibility was just a happy bonus?" I laughed despite myself. "I won't pretend I'm sorry about that part." "Nor should you be," Olivia insisted. "He tried to steal your work after years of dismissing your abilities. He deserved exactly what he got." We chatted a while longer about practical next steps, hiring an assistant, finalizing the office setup, scheduling initial client meetings beyond Catherine, until Olivia had to return to her own work. As I ended the call, standing in the center of my empty office, the enormity of the transition I was making finally hit me fully. A month ago, I had been Jason's wife, hosting dinner parties and managing our social calendar while quietly nursing. Professional dreams I never quite believed I could realize. Now I was a funded business owner with a major client, an office, and a voice that had finally been heard. The contrast was so stark it almost made me dizzy. Not just the external circumstances, but the internal shift. From a woman who sought approval to one who trusted her own judgment. From someone who absorbed criticism silently to someone who defended her worth publicly. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You've made a serious mistake. Jay." I stared at the message, recognizing it as a significant escalation. Jason had created a new number to contact me after I'd blocked his original one. The implicit threat in his words should have frightened me, but instead I felt a strange calm. Jason's tactics were predictable now that I could see them clearly. When charm failed, he turned to intimidation, believing fear would succeed where manipulation had not. Instead of responding, I took a screenshot and emailed it to my lawyer with a brief note explaining the context. Then I blocked this number too and returned to planning my office layout. I wouldn't live in fear of Jason's retaliation. I would simply prepare for it, anticipate it, and continue building my life regardless. By late afternoon, I had finalized designs for my office, scheduled meetings with potential assistants for later that week, and outlined a detailed implementation plan for Catherine's account. Productive satisfaction hummed through me as I prepared to leave, but as I turned toward the door, I froze. Jason stood in the doorway, watching me with an unsettling intensity. He must have followed me or guessed where I would be. Either possibility was concerning. "Nice space," he said, stepping inside without invitation. "Small, but I suppose it's adequate for a startup." I maintained the distance between us, acutely aware that we were alone in a largely empty building. "How did you find me?" "You mentioned looking at spaces in this area to Andrew. It wasn't difficult to narrow it down." He glanced around, assessing. "No security system yet? You should prioritize that." The implied threat hung in the air, between us. I reached casually into my pocket, wrapping my hand around my phone. "What do you want, Jason?" "To talk. Without an audience. Without Meridian politics complicating things." He moved further into the space, his footsteps echoing on the bare floors. "You had quite a performance today. The board was impressed." "It wasn't a performance," I replied, evenly. "It was the truth." "Your version of it, maybe." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same one I'd given him for his birthday last year. "But we both know there's more to the story." Such as the fact that you've been planning this for months," he said, his voice hardening. Setting aside money, preparing your business, waiting for the right moment to blindside me professionally and personally. I've been working toward my business for over a year, I acknowledged. But contrary to what you seem to believe, it wasn't about you. It was about me finally pursuing what I wanted instead of subjugating my ambitions to yours. And the timing, the client, the public humiliation, all just coincidental? His laugh was bitter. You're more calculating than I gave you credit for, Becca. No, Jason, I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never bothered to really see me. I moved toward the door, indicating our conversation was over. Please leave. I have work to finish. He didn't move. The divorce papers came today. I nodded, unsurprised. My lawyer had mentioned they would be delivered this week. Then you should review them with your attorney. 50% of everything, he said, incredulity coloring his voice. After what you've already taken. That's your idea of fair? It's the law's idea of fair, I corrected him. Equal division of assets acquired during marriage. I built my career while you played at being a consultant, he snapped. My salary, my bonuses, those are mine. And my contributions? To your career, the networking, the client management, the personal support that allowed you to focus exclusively on work. Those disappear because they didn't come with a paycheck? I shook my head. That's not how partnership works, Jason. Not marriage and not business. His expression darkened. You won't get away with this. With what, exactly? Building my own business? Securing my own clients? Expecting an equitable divorce settlement? None of these things are crimes, Jason. They're just consequences you didn't anticipate. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness. You know, I've been thinking about that night at Riverside, about the wine. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral, refusing to show fear. What about it? I've replayed it in my mind, trying to understand why I did it. His eyes never left mine. And I realized something. Part of me knew, even then. I could feel you pulling away, becoming someone I didn't recognize. The wine wasn't about your comment. It was about trying to remind you of your place. The casual cruelty of his admission stunned me. Not the action itself. I had experienced that firsthand. But the calculated intent behind it, now openly acknowledged. My place, I repeated softly. And where exactly did you think that was? Jason? Beside me, he answered immediately. Supporting me, making me look good. That was the arrangement, Becca. That was our marriage. That was your delusion, I corrected him. And I thank you for stating it so clearly. My lawyer will be interested to hear how you conceptualized our partnership. His face flushed with anger. You're twisting my words. I'm taking them at face value, perhaps for the first time. I moved toward the door again, more firmly this time. Now please leave, or I'll call security. He glanced around the empty office with a smirk. What? Security? The security company whose silent alarm button I pressed when you first walked in. I bluffed smoothly. They should be here within minutes. Uncertainty flickered across his face. He hadn't noticed my hand in my pocket, hadn't realized I might have measures in place to protect myself. The possibility that I had anticipated his behavior, prepared for it, clearly unsettled him. This conversation isn't finished, he said, backing toward the door nevertheless. Yes, Jason, it is. Just like our marriage. I met his gaze steadily. All future communication can go through our lawyers. He paused at the threshold, one last barb ready. You know what your problem is, Becca. You've convinced yourself this new persona is real. The confident entrepreneur, the independent woman. But we both know it's just an act. Sooner or later, you'll remember who you really are. I smiled then, genuinely. That's exactly what's happened, Jason. I've remembered who I really am, who I was before I started believing your version of me. And that's why this is working. For a moment, something like recognition flickered in his eyes. The understanding that he had truly lost control, not just of me, but of the narrative he'd constructed around us both. Then his expression hardened again, and he turned away without another word, footsteps echoing down the corridor as he departed. I waited until I heard the building's exterior door close before sinking into the single chair I'd brought into the office earlier that day. My hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline ebbed, leaving me drained but clear-headed. Jason's visit had been meant to intimidate me, to reassert dominance, to make me question my decisions. Instead, it had only confirmed that I was on the right path. His unmasked contempt, his barely veiled threats, his blatant admission about the wine incident, all of it showed me exactly what I had been living with, perhaps clearer than I had ever seen it before. I took out my phone and made 2 calls. First, to an actual security company to arrange immediate installation of a system for the office. Second, to my lawyer, detailing Jason's unexpected visit and his concerning statements. Both calls were practical, protective measures, not driven by fear, but by a pragmatic assessment of what I needed to secure my new life. As the spring evening settled over Portland, I stood at my office window watching the city transition from workday to nightlife. Lights came on in surrounding buildings. People streamed out of offices heading home or to happy hours, the energy shifting but never quite stopping. I felt connected to that energy now, in a way I hadn't when I was living in Jason's carefully controlled world. My phone buzzed, with a text from Olivia. "Drinks to celebrate your victory? The whole gang wants to hear the story." I smiled, typing back, "Absolutely. Meet you at Harlow's in an hour." As I gathered my things to leave, I paused to look back at the empty space that would soon become the physical manifestation of Thompson Consulting. The confrontation with Jason had left its emotional residue, but it hadn't diminished my sense of ownership or possibility. If anything, it had strengthened my resolve to build something meaningful here. I locked the door behind me, already planning the security upgrades I would implement immediately. Jason had shown his hand today, his anger, his bitterness, his potential for escalation. I wouldn't underestimate the lengths he might go to in an attempt to regain control or extract revenge. But neither would I allow that possibility to constrain me. As I stepped out into the evening air, I realized something had fundamentally shifted within me. The woman who had walked out of Riverside with wine staining her blouse had been wounded, but also awakened. The woman who had faced down Jason in a boardroom had been determined, but still finding her footing. The woman who now walked confidently. Toward her car, toward her friends, toward her future. She was neither wounded nor uncertain. She was, simply and completely, herself. And that was something Jason could never take away again. 3 months passed with the momentum of a river, finding its true course. Thompson Consulting grew from a single client to 7, from an empty office to a vibrant workspace with 3 employees, from an idea I had nurtured in secret to a respected name in Portland's business community. Each day brought new challenges, but they were challenges I faced on my terms, with a confidence that deepened with every small victory. The Women in Tech Summit loomed on the horizon, just 2 days away now, and despite my growing professional assurance, I couldn't deny the flutter of anxiety I felt whenever I thought about speaking in front of hundreds of industry professionals, including Jason, who had made no secret of his plans to attend. "Your slide deck is perfect," said Maya, reviewing my presentation in the conference room of my office. "Stop overthinking it." I smiled ruefully. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been where you are?" Maya closed her laptop decisively. "The first public speaking engagement after you've reinvented yourself is always the hardest. You're not just worried about the content, you're worried about being seen, really seen, in your new identity." Her perception was unsettling. in its accuracy. I keep imagining Jason in the audience, watching for any sign of weakness. Of course you do, but here's what you're forgetting. Maya leaned forward, her gaze direct and unflinching. Everyone else will be watching you too. Not as Jason's ex-wife, but as the founder who secured Catherine Miller as her first client. As the woman who built a thriving consultancy in 3 months. As someone with insights worth hearing. I absorbed her words, letting them settle alongside the anxiety. I know you're right. Intellectually, at least. The emotional part takes longer, she acknowledged. But speaking as your investor, I'm exceptionally pleased with your progress, both professionally and personally. Her validation meant more than I could express. Maya had become not just a financial backer, but a mentor, guiding me through the intricacies of entrepreneurship with straightforward advice that balanced ambition with pragmatism. The funding round is officially closed, she continued, changing subjects. We had more interest than expected. You could have raised another 100,000 if you'd wanted to. The current investment is sufficient for our growth projections. I replied, a decision I'd reached after careful analysis rather than caution. I'd rather maintain the equity distribution we have now than dilute it further. Maya nodded approvingly. Smart. Many first-time founders get distracted by the validation of fundraising and lose sight of what they actually need. She gathered her things, preparing to leave. One last thing. Wear something remarkable for the summit. Not just professional, memorable. Fashion advice from my venture capitalist? I teased. That wasn't in the term sheet. Consider it value-added. Service, she replied with a smile. The audience will remember your ideas better if they're delivered in a visual package that reinforces your brand. After Maya left, I sat alone in the conference room, considering her advice. My brand. 6 months ago, the concept would have seemed foreign, almost pretentious. Now it was a practical consideration. How did I want to be perceived? What impression did I want to leave? What story did I want my appearance to tell about Thompson Consulting? My phone buzzed with a notification from my lawyer. Divorce mediation scheduled for next Tuesday. Jason's lawyer finally responded to our proposal. The timing wasn't coincidental. Jason had been delaying the divorce proceedings for weeks, a transparent attempt to maintain some control over my life. Scheduling the mediation immediately after the Women in Tech Summit was his way of applying pressure, hoping I'd be too distracted by preparation for my speech to properly focus on protecting my interests in the settlement. What he failed to understand was how thoroughly I had prepared for this negotiation, just as I had prepared for every other aspect of my new life. The documentation was meticulous, the financial analysis comprehensive, the legal strategy sound. His delaying tactics had only given me more time to strengthen my position. I texted back a brief acknowledgement to my lawyer, then returned to reviewing my presentation. The panel I'd be speaking on was titled, Breaking Barriers, Women Redefining Business Leadership, and I would be sharing the stage with 3 other female founders, including Maya. My segment focused on recognizing and reclaiming one's professional value, a topic that had evolved from personal experience into actionable insights. As evening descended on Portland, I left the office and walked to a nearby boutique that Olivia had recommended. Maya's advice about dressing memorably resonated with me, and I had a specific vision in mind for the summit. The shop owner, a woman, with a precise eye and decisive opinions, guided me through options until we found exactly what I was looking for. A structured blazer in deep burgundy with subtle gold threading, the color of wine transformed into something empowering rather than humiliating. It's perfect, I said, studying my reflection. The woman looking back at me was poised, confident, unmistakably herself. I'll take it. The night before the summit, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, practicing my presentation aloud, adjusting phrasings, refining transitions. When exhaustion finally overtook me around 3 a.m., my dreams were vivid but fragmented. Standing at a podium with no notes, facing an audience that transformed from supportive to hostile, Jason's voice cutting through the crowd with questions designed to undermine me. I woke before dawn, gritty-eyed but clear-minded. Whatever happened at the summit, it was simply one day, one speech, one step in a journey that had already progressed further than I could have imagined 6 months earlier. I showered, dressed in the burgundy blazer over a cream silk shell and tailored black pants, applied makeup with careful precision, and headed to the convention center where the summit was being held. The venue was already buzzing when I arrived. Tech professionals of all genders milling around exhibition booths, networking over coffee, finding seats for the opening keynote. I spotted several Meridian employees, though Jason wasn't among them, yet. Catherine Miller waved me over to where she was chatting with a group of women executives. "Here she is," Catherine said warmly, making introductions. "Rebecca Thompson, the strategist I've been telling you about. Her insights on market positioning for female-driven brands have been transformative for us." The endorsement from someone of Catherine's stature drew immediate interest from the other executives. I found myself engaged in a substantive discussion about demographic shifts and authentic brand messaging, the conversation flowing naturally into an exchange of business cards and promises of follow-up meetings. "You're a natural at this," Catherine observed as the group dispersed before the keynote began. "Hard to believe you were hidden behind Jason for so long." "I was hiding as much as being hidden," I admitted. "It took me time to recognize my own value." "Well, you've certainly found it now, and others are noticing." She nodded toward where Andrew Harrington stood with several Meridian board members, all of whom were glancing in our direction. "Your work on our account has not gone unnoticed. In the industry, the results speak for themselves." The results had indeed been impressive. In just 3 months, Catherine's company had seen a 22% increase in engagement from their target demographic, with corresponding growth in sales and brand recognition. It was the kind of success story that generated attention, especially in Portland's tightly interconnected business community. "Speaking of results," Catherine continued, lowering her voice slightly, "there have been some significant changes at Meridian you should know about." "What kind of changes?" I asked, curious despite my determination to focus on my own path, rather than Jason's. "The board's review of project management and credit attribution has led to some restructuring." Catherine chose her words carefully. "Jason's position has been significantly altered. The Seattle expansion he was overseeing has been scaled back, and his team reassigned to other directors." I absorbed this information, neutrally. "I see." "It's not just about your situation," Catherine clarified. "Once the board started examining patterns, they found numerous instances where women's contributions were minimized or appropriated. It seems you opened a door that needed opening." Before I could respond, the announcement for attendees to take their seats for the keynote echoed through the hall. Catherine squeezed my arm encouragingly. "You're going to be wonderful on the panel later. Just be as authentic there as you are in our strategy sessions." The morning passed in a blur of presentations, networking breaks, and preparation for my panel. I caught glimpses of Jason occasionally, standing with decreasing numbers of colleagues, checking his phone with growing frequency, looking increasingly isolated in a community where relationships were currency. I felt no satisfaction in his apparent professional difficulties, only a distant sadness for what might have been if he had chosen collaboration over domination, partnership over control. By early afternoon, it was time for my panel. The moderator gathered us in a preparation room, reviewing the format and flow of the discussion. Maya arrived last, impeccable in a cobalt blue suit that made her presence impossible to ignore. "Ready?" she asked me quietly as we waited to be introduced. "As I'll ever be," I replied honestly. "Remember, you've earned your place here," she said, straightening my already straight blazer in a gesture that felt almost maternal. The rest of the panel has been in the industry for years, but no one has a story quite like yours. Use it. We walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, taking our seats as the moderator introduced each panelist. When my turn came, the FI description was both thrilling and surreal to hear stated publicly. Rebecca Thompson, founder and CEO of Thompson Consulting, who in just 3 months has built a client roster that includes Fortune 500 companies seeking her unique perspective on market positioning and brand strategy. The panel discussion began with broad questions about leadership challenges and adaptation strategies before narrowing to each panelist's specific expertise. When the moderator turned to me, her question was deceptively straightforward. Rebecca, what would you say is the most valuable insight you've gained in your journey from corporate spouse to successful founder? I took a measured breath, scanning the audience briefly. Jason sat near the back, his expression carefully neutral. Catherine and her executives were closer to the front, along with several of my newer clients. Olivia gave me a subtle thumbs up from the side. The most valuable insight, I began, my voice steady and clear, is understanding that our professional value exists independently of how others perceive or acknowledge it. For years, I allowed my contributions to be minimized because I accepted someone else's assessment of their worth. The turning point came when I realized that value isn't something bestowed on us by others. It's inherent in the quality of our work and the integrity of our approach. The moderator nodded encouragingly. Was there a specific moment that catalyzed this realization for you? I smiled slightly, the burgundy blazer suddenly feeling like armor. Yes, though perhaps not in the way you might expect. Sometimes illumination comes from unexpected places, even from a glass of wine thrown in your face at a business dinner. A murmur rippled through the audience. I hadn't planned to reference the incident so directly, but once spoken, the words felt right, honest in a way that theoretical answers wouldn't have been. What I learned from that moment wasn't just about leaving a toxic situation, I continued. It was about recognizing patterns that diminish women's voices in professional settings. The interruptions, the appropriation of ideas, the subtle and not so subtle ways we're taught to make ourselves smaller to accommodate others' comfort. The moderator, clearly intrigued by this candid response, leaned forward. And how has that recognition shaped your approach as a business leader? It's shaped everything, I said simply. From how I structure client relationships to ensure all voices are heard, to how I build my team to create space for collaborative innovation. When you've experienced having your contributions dismissed, you become acutely attuned to creating environments where that doesn't happen to others. The discussion flowed naturally from there, with other panelists sharing their own experiences of finding their authentic leadership voices. Throughout, I felt a growing ease, not just with the public speaking that had so concerned me, but with fully inhabiting my professional identity in this most public of forums. When the panel concluded to enthusiastic applause, several audience members approached with questions and business cards. I engaged with each one genuinely, no longer the careful social navigator I'd been as Jason's wife, but a business leader with my own distinct perspective to offer. As the crowd around me gradually dispersed, I found myself face to face with Jason. He looked different somehow. The confident sharpness I was accustomed to had dulled, replaced by something more uncertain. "Impressive performance," he said, his tone making the compliment sound like an accusation. "You certainly know how to tell a compelling story." "It wasn't a performance, Jason," I replied calmly, "just the truth as I lived it." "The wine incident," he said, lowering his voice. "Did you have to be quite so specific? People will know exactly who you were talking about." "I didn't mention any names," I pointed out, "and if people connect the dots, perhaps that's a consequence worth considering." He glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with our conversation being observed by passing attendees. The mediation is Tuesday. Yes, I received the notification. My lawyer thinks we should discuss terms beforehand, privately. I studied him carefully, noting the tension in his posture, the slight desperation in his eyes. All discussions should happen through our attorneys, Jason. That's why we have them. This divorce doesn't have to be adversarial, he insisted. We were partners for 7 years. Surely we can reach an arrangement that works for both of us. That's exactly what I've proposed. An equitable division that recognizes both our contributions to the marriage. I maintained a professional distance, aware of curious glances from nearby summit attendees. Your lawyer has had the proposal for weeks. Jason's expression hardened slightly. Things have changed since then. My position at Meridian isn't what it was. I've heard, I acknowledged, Catherine's earlier information confirmed by his admission. But that doesn't change our history or what's fair in the dissolution of our marriage. Be reasonable, Becca, he said, an edge creeping into his voice. You're doing well now. Thompson Consulting is obviously thriving. Do you really need to take half of everything I've built too? The familiar tactics, the appeal to reason that suggested my position was unreasonable, the implication that I was being greedy rather than asserting my legal rights, were transparent now where once they might have swayed me. Our attorneys will handle the details, I repeated firmly. This isn't the appropriate venue for this discussion. Before he could respond, Maya appeared at my side, her timing impeccable. Rebecca, the panel was excellent. Catherine Miller is looking for you. She wants to introduce you to some colleagues from New York. Jason stepped back, recognizing the deliberate interruption for what it was. We'll continue this Tuesday, he said, a statement rather than a question. Our lawyers will, I corrected gently, then turned to join Maya. Holding up okay? She asked as we moved through the crowd. Better than I expected, I admitted. There's something liberating about speaking your truth publicly. It tends to make the private confrontations easier, she agreed. Once something's in the open, it loses its power to intimidate. Catherine was indeed waiting, surrounded by executives from a major New York-based brand management firm with obvious interest in Thompson Consulting's approach. The conversation that followed was engaging and substantive, culminating in an invitation to present to their leadership team the following month, an opportunity that would significantly expand my company's national profile. As the summit wound down, I found myself surrounded by a small group of women who had approached somewhat hesitantly. They weren't executives or founders, but mid-level professionals from various Portland companies, including Meridian. Your panel really resonated with me, one said quietly. Especially what you said about recognizing patterns of dismissal. I've experienced that exact dynamic for years but couldn't quite articulate it. I left a toxic workplace last year, another shared. The hardest part wasn't the leaving, it was believing I had value outside the identity I'd built there. One by one, they shared their stories, of ideas appropriated without credit, of confidence systematically undermined, of professional worth questioned, despite clear evidence of competence. I listened with genuine attention, recognizing in each account echoes of my own experience. How did you find the courage? Asked a younger woman, her expression earnest. To start over? To build something new when everything familiar was behind you? I considered her question carefully. I don't think of it as courage exactly. It was more like clarity. A moment when continuing as I had been suddenly became more frightening than the unknown alternatives. The wine, someone murmured, and several nodded in understanding. The wine was a catalyst, I acknowledged, but the foundation for change had been building long before that. Sometimes we need a dramatic moment to grant ourselves permission to act on what we already know. Our conversation continued until event staff began dismantling the exhibition booths around us. We exchanged contact information, and I impulsively invited them to a networking event Thomson Consulting would host the following month, an opportunity to expand their professional connections in an environment deliberately structured to value diverse contributions. As I finally left the convention center, stepping into the gentle Portland evening, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not just of the summit or the panel, but of a larger cycle that had begun that night at Riverside. The woman who had walked out with wine staining her blouse, humiliation burning her cheeks, had completed her transformation, not into someone new, but into her authentic self, long suppressed, but never truly lost. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "You killed it today. Celebration dinner at my place tonight with the crew. Non-negotiable." I smiled, typing back my acceptance. Once, social invitations had been obligations to be managed within the constraints of Jason's preferences. Now they were genuine pleasures, connections that nourished rather than depleted me. A second message followed immediately. P.S. Just FYI. Word around the summit is that Jason's being pushed out of Meridian entirely. Board decision, effective end of month. I stared at the screen, absorbing this unexpected information. Jason's professional identity had been so thoroughly entwined with Meridian that separation seemed almost unimaginable. For 7 years, I had listened to him speak of the company as if it were an extension of himself, its successes, his successes, its future inseparable from his own. A complex emotion rose within me, not satisfaction or vindication, but something more nuanced. Perhaps it was recognition of how patterns extend beyond individual relationships into institutional structures, how behaviors tolerated in private eventually face public reckoning. Perhaps it was simply the symmetry of parallel journeys. As I built something new from the fragments of what had shattered, Jason faced the dismantling of what he had believed unshakable. I didn't respond to Olivia's postscript, tucking my phone away as I walked to my car. Jason's professional future was no longer my concern, just as my growth was no longer constrained by his limitations. We had been thoroughly disentangled, financially, emotionally, professionally, and would soon be legally separated as well. Driving through Portland's evening traffic, I mentally reviewed the day's accomplishments. A successful panel presentation, promising new business contacts, meaningful connections with women facing challenges I understood intimately. More than any single achievement, what felt most significant was the internal shift that had solidified. The quiet, unshakable certainty that my value existed independently of external validation. 6 months ago, I had been defined primarily by my relationship to Jason. Today, I was defined by my own vision, my own capabilities, my own choices. Thomson Consulting wasn't just a business. It was tangible proof that what Jason had dismissed as hobby had always been expertise, waiting for the right conditions to flourish. As I arrived at Olivia's building, I paused before getting out of the car, giving myself a moment to appreciate the journey. The wine that had once stained my blouse had become the burgundy blazer I wore with pride. The humiliation that had burned my cheeks had transformed into the warm glow of authentic success. The silence I had maintained for years had evolved into a voice that resonated with others seeking their own clarity. The final piece of symmetry wasn't lost on me, that in my quest for independence, I had ultimately become what Jason most feared, the woman who had taken his place. Not by design or vindictiveness, but through the natural consequences of recognizing and reclaiming my own value. I had become his new boss, not literally through corporate hierarchy, but in the more profound sense of defining success on my own terms, while he struggled to maintain his grip on externally bestowed status. Olivia opened her door to greet me, champagne already poured for a proper celebration. "To the star of the Women in Tech Summit," she toasted as I entered, "and to whatever comes next." I raised my glass, crystal clear and filled with sparkling possibility. "To whatever comes next," I echoed, certain for the first time that whatever it might be, I would face it as myself, no longer diminished, no longer defined by others, but whole and clear and fiercely authentic. The future, like the champagne, in my glass, sparkled with possibilities entirely my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.